A simple visit to a coffee shop completely changed the life of a powerful tycoon. An unexpected phrase forced him to confront a past he thought was buried. Fate revealed a secret kept hidden for more than 2 decades, changing everything he thought. He knew. When the truth finally came to light, he realized nothing would ever be the same. Before discovering this emotional story, subscribe to the channel for more unforgettable tales. The intense aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air of the small cafe in the heart of the historic district. It was another Monday morning, and Richard Morgan, at 53, was following his meticulously planned routine. Owner of one of the country's largest hotel chains, he was known for his discipline and absolute control over every aspect of his life. Wearing an impeccably tailored suit, Richard entered the establishment with firm steps. The bell above the door chimed softly, announcing his arrival. The owner, a gray-haired gentleman, greeted him with a familiar smile. "Good morning, Mr. Morgan. The usual?" Richard nodded, heading to his habitual table by the window. As he settled in, he took his smartphone from his pocket and began checking his emails. The routine was always the same: morning exercises, analysis of financial reports, and now his moment of pause in this cafe that had become his private refuge. The soft murmur of conversations around him and the sound of clinking cups created a welcoming atmosphere. Richard barely noticed this, focused on his screen. His eyes quickly scanned the messages, his mind already calculating strategies and solutions for the day's challenges. "Excuse me, sir, your coffee." The soft voice pulled him from his thoughts. Richard looked up, meeting the gaze of a young employee he didn't recognize. She smiled gently, placing the steaming cup on the table. "Thank you," he responded automatically, already extending his hand to take the beverage. "Be careful. It's hot," the young woman warned, and then added, "My mother always said that coffee can burn twice, on the tongue and in the heart." The words hit him like lightning. Richard froze, his hands suspended in midair. That phrase, it was exactly the same one that Eleanor, his late wife, used to say. A wave of memories invaded him, memories that for years he had tried to keep, buried deep in his mind. Slowly, he raised his eyes to the young woman. Her face, her expression, her way of speaking, everything about her seemed strangely familiar. A shiver ran down his spine, and he felt his heart race. "Excuse me, Richard," said, his voice trembling slightly, "but what's your mother's name?" The young woman seemed surprised by the question, but answered without hesitation. "Eleanor. Eleanor Davis." The world around Richard seemed to disappear. The noise of the cafe became a distant buzz. Eleanor Davis. The same name as his late wife, it couldn't be a coincidence. "And how old are you?" he asked, trying to maintain his composure. 24, she replied, now clearly intrigued by the customer's curiosity. Richard made a quick calculation. 24 years ago. It was exactly the time when he and Eleanor had a brief separation, shortly before their wedding. A turbulent period that both preferred to forget after reconciliation. The possibility forming in his mind was overwhelming. Could it be that... No, it was impossible. He would have known. Eleanor would have told him, wouldn't she? "Is everything all right, sir?" the young woman asked, noticing his sudden paleness. Richard forced a smile, trying to regain control. Yes, just remembered something important. Thank you for the coffee." The young woman nodded and walked away, leaving Richard alone with his tumultuous thoughts. He looked at the coffee, now cooling, forgotten. The meticulously planned routine of his life had just been completely shaken. As he watched the young woman attend to other tables, Richard couldn't take his eyes off her. Each movement, each smile seemed an echo of Eleanor. The resemblance was disturbing. And that phrase about coffee, it was too specific to be a coincidence. For the first time in years, Richard Morgan, the man who always had control of everything, felt completely lost. Questions accumulated in his mind. Who was this young woman, really? Why did she remind him so much of Eleanor? And the most frightening of all, could it be that after all these years, he had discovered he had a daughter? His cell phone vibrated. on the table, reminding him of an important meeting. But for the first time in his life, Richard didn't care. His eyes remained fixed on the young woman, while his mind tried to process the turn his life had just taken. He knew he couldn't simply leave and pretend nothing had happened. This unexpected encounter at the cafe had the potential to change everything. And Richard, even reluctantly, knew he needed to discover the truth, no matter how painful it might be. With trembling hands, he picked up the coffee cup, now lukewarm, and took a sip. The familiar taste momentarily calmed him, but the storm inside was just beginning. As he watched the young woman move around the cafe, Richard knew his orderly and predictable life had come to an end. A new journey, filled with uncertainties and possibilities, was about to begin, and it all started with a simple cup of coffee and a phrase that echoed from the past. In the days that followed, Richard Morgan saw his meticulously organized life crumble like a house of cards. The routine that once brought him comfort and security now seemed empty and meaningless. His thoughts were constantly turned to the young woman from the cafe, whose name he discovered was Emma. Sitting in his luxurious office on the top floor of the Morgan Plaza Hotel, the flagship of his hotel chain, Richard could barely concentrate on the financial reports in front of him. The words and numbers jumbled together, losing meaning in the face of the possibility that tormented him. Did he have a daughter he never knew about? Martha, his efficient secretary for over 2 decades, noticed the change in her boss's behavior. Normally precise and focused, Richard now seemed distant, lost in thought. She hesitated before knocking on the half-open office door. "Mr. Morgan? Mr. Reynolds from the construction company is on the line. Would you like me to transfer the call?" Richard blinked, as if awakening from a trance. "Ah, yes. No. Tell him I'll call back later, please." Martha frowned, concerned. "Is everything all right, sir? You seem a bit distracted these days." For a moment, Richard considered sharing his dilemma with Martha. After all, she was practically family after so many years. But the words got stuck in his throat. How could he explain something he didn't fully understand himself? "I'm fine. Martha, just thinking about some personal matters. Thank you for your concern." Martha nodded, not entirely convinced, and withdrew, gently closing the door behind her. Alone again, Richard swiveled his chair to face the panoramic window that offered a stunning view of the city. Down below, people seemed tiny, each living their own story, facing their own dilemmas. How many of them, he wondered, carried secrets as heavy as the one now oppressing him? His eyes fixed on a distant point, but his mind wandered to the past. 24 years ago, he and Eleanor had briefly separated. It was a tumultuous period, marked by heated arguments and hasty decisions. Richard had thrown himself headfirst into work, using the construction of his hotel empire as an escape from the pain of separation. Eleanor, on the other hand, had disappeared for a few months. When she returned, proposing reconciliation, Richard accepted without hesitation. The love they felt for each other was too strong to be ignored. They married shortly afterward, and the months of separation became a taboo subject rarely mentioned. Now, looking back, Richard realized that he had never really questioned what Eleanor had done during that time. The trust between them was so deep that questions seemed unnecessary. But what if? The phone on his desk rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was a reminder of an important meeting with investors. Richard sighed deeply, trying to compose himself. The world didn't stop, even when his personal life was turned upside down. Adjusting his tie and running his hands through his graying hair, he prepared to face another day of negotiations and corporate decisions. But, in the back of his mind, Emma's image persisted, a constant reminder of the mystery he needed to unravel. As he left the office, Richard paused, turning to Martha. "Martha, please cancel my appointments for tomorrow morning. I have a personal matter to resolve." The secretary looked at him in surprise. In all these years, Richard Morgan had never cancelled appointments for personal reasons. She nodded, promising to rearrange his schedule. That night, in his penthouse apartment, Richard found himself unable to sleep. He tossed and turned in his king-size bed, his gaze fixed on the ceiling. Memories of Eleanor mixed with Emma's image danced in his mind. He got up and walked to the balcony, observing the lights of the city that never slept. Somewhere out there was Emma, perhaps sleeping peacefully, unaware of the turmoil she had unleashed in a stranger's life. Richard made a decision. Tomorrow he would return to the cafe. He couldn't continue living with this doubt. He needed to talk to Emma, find out more about her story, about her mother. Even if the truth was painful, it was better than the uncertainty consuming him. The sky began to lighten on the horizon. Heralding a new day, Richard Morgan was preparing to face what could be the most impactful revelation of his life. The man who had always planned every step of his existence now found himself at the mercy of fate, about to embark on a journey that would change everything he knew about himself and his past. With a heavy heart but determined, he watched the sunrise, knowing that when the sun set again, his life could be completely different. The search for truth was about to begin, and there was no turning back. The morning arrived with a soft mist enveloping the city, as if the weather itself reflected the uncertainty hovering over Richard. He dressed with care, opting for a more casual outfit than his usual executive suit. He wanted to appear approachable, not intimidating. Upon arriving at the cafe, his heart was beating erratically. The familiar aroma of coffee failed to calm him. This time, his eyes scanned the environment looking for Emma. Disappointment hit him when he didn't see her. "Good morning, Mr. Morgan," greeted the owner, surprised to see him outside his usual schedule. "You're early today." Richard forced a smile. "Good morning. Yes, I changed my routine a bit." He hesitated for a moment before asking, "The young woman who served me the other day, Emma, is she working today?" The owner frowned, thoughtful. "Ah, Emma, no, today is her day off. She only returns tomorrow." The news fell like a bucket of cold water on Richard. He had planned everything for this moment, and now he would have to wait another day. The anxiety was eating him up inside. "I see," he murmured, trying to hide his frustration. "Well, I'll have my coffee anyway." He sat at his usual table, thoughts swirling. What would he do now? Come back the next day? The wait seemed unbearable. As he sipped his coffee, an idea emerged. Perhaps he could get some information from the owner. After all, he must know his employees. "Excuse me," Richard called, signaling for the owner to approach. "Sorry to bother you, but do you know Emma well? Has she worked here long?" The man smiled, pulling up a chair to sit down. "Ah, Emma is a great girl. She's been with us for about 2 years. Came from a small town, you know. Very hard-working. Always punctual." Richard nodded, absorbing every word. "And her family, do you know them?" The owner scratched his graying beard. "Well, I know she lives with just her mother. Her father, she never knew him from what I understand. But look, Mr. Morgan, I don't like talking about my employees' lives. Emma is a good girl and—" No, Richard interrupted, realizing how his curiosity might seem suspicious. "It's nothing like that. I just thought she resembled someone I knew a long time ago." The man visibly relaxed. "I understand. Well, if you want to talk to her, come tomorrow. She'll be on the morning shift." Thanking him, Richard watched as the owner walked away. The little information he obtained only served to increase his anxiety. The absence of a father in Emma's life fueled his suspicions. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Richard tried to focus on work, but his mind always returned to Emma and the possibilities she represented. At night, in his apartment, he found himself looking at old photographs, searching in Eleanor's features for some trait that might confirm her connection to the young woman from the cafe. One photo in particular caught his attention. Eleanor, radiant in her wedding dress, smiled at the camera, but there was something in her eyes, an almost imperceptible shadow that Richard had never noticed before. Was it guilt, a secret, or just his fertile imagination projecting his own doubts? The sound of his cell phone pulled him from his reverie. It was a message from his sister, Christina. "Hi, little brother. All good? It's been a while since we talked. How about lunch on Sunday?" Richard hesitated. Normally, he would accept right away. Christina was his only family since Eleanor's passing, but now, with this whole situation, he wasn't sure if he could keep up appearances. After a few Minutes, he replied. Hi, Chris, Sunday is great. I have some things to talk to you about. Perhaps, he thought, it would be good to have someone to share this burden with. Christina had always been his confidant, and her perspective could be valuable. The night advanced slowly. Richard barely managed to sleep, his mind replaying different scenarios for the meeting with Emma. How to approach her, what to say, and what if he was completely wrong? When the sun finally rose, Richard was already up. He carefully chose his clothes, as if preparing for the most important meeting of his life. In a sense, it was exactly that. The path to the cafe seemed longer than ever. Each traffic light, each pedestrian slowly crossing the street, seemed to conspire to delay his encounter with destiny. Upon arrival, he saw Emma through the window serving customers with a gentle smile. His heart raced. It was now or never. Taking a deep breath, Richard entered the cafe. The bell above the door announced his arrival, and Emma turned to greet him. "Good morning, sir." "The usual." Richard swallowed hard. "Actually, could we talk for a moment, when you have time, of course?" Emma's expression changed from surprise to curiosity. "Sure, just a moment." As she finished serving some customers, Richard sat down, his hands trembling slightly. Years of difficult negotiations and corporate decisions hadn't prepared him for this moment. Finally, Emma approached, drying her hands on her apron. "Ready, sir. How can I help?" "You?" Richard looked into her eyes, seeking courage. "Emma, this may seem strange, but I need to ask you some questions about your family, about your mother specifically." The young woman frowned, clearly confused. "My mother? But why?" "Because..." Richard took a deep breath, the words weighing on his tongue. "There's a possibility that I might be your father." The silence that followed was deafening. Emma stared at him, her eyes wide with shock. The revelation hung between them, heavy and inescapable, ready to change their lives forever. The cafe's buzz seemed to have disappeared. Richard and Emma were enveloped in a bubble of silence, his words still reverberating in the air between. For them, Emma's expression was a mix of shock, confusion, and a hint of distrust. "What?" she finally managed to say, her voice low and tremulous. "What do you mean, my father? That doesn't make sense." Richard noticed that several people were watching them curiously. This wasn't the ideal place for such a delicate conversation. "Emma," he said softly, "I know this seems crazy. Believe me, it's difficult for me too. Could we talk somewhere more private? Maybe after your shift?" The young woman seemed to be in a trance, struggling to process the information. She looked around, noticing for the first time the curious glances from customers. I don't know," she stammered. "How can I trust you? I don't even know you." Richard felt a pang of pain hearing those words. It was true. He was a stranger to her. How could he expect her to trust him just like that? "I understand your hesitation," he replied, trying to keep his voice calm. "I'm not asking you to believe me immediately. I just ask for a chance to explain. Afterward, you decide what you want to do with that information." Emma bit her lip, undecided. Her eyes, Richard noticed, were identical to Eleanor's. The same shade of brown, the same expressiveness. "All right," she finally agreed. "My shift ends at 5 p.m. We can meet at the park nearby afterward." Richard nodded, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. "Thank you, Emma. I'll be there." The hours that followed were a test of patience for Richard. He wandered around the city, unable to return to the office or home. His thoughts were a jumble of memories, doubts, and hopes. At 5 p.m. sharp, he was sitting on a bench in the park, anxiously observing each person passing by. Finally, he spotted Emma approaching. She had exchanged her cafe uniform for jeans and a simple blouse and seemed equally nervous. "Hello," she said, sitting at a safe distance from him on the bench. "Thank you for coming," Richard began. "I know this must be very strange for you." Emma nodded, her eyes fixed on a distant point. "Why do you think you might be my father?" Richard took a deep breath. It was time for the truth. 24 years ago, I was engaged to a woman named Eleanor Davis. We briefly separated before the wedding. When we reconciled and got married, we never talked much about that period of separation. Eleanor, she passed away 15 years ago. Emma looked at him in surprise. Eleanor Davis? That's my mother's name. Richard's heart raced. Yes, and when you mentioned that phrase about coffee burning twice, it was exactly what Eleanor used to say. My mother always said that, Emma murmured, her eyes filling with tears. But how can this be? She never mentioned your name, never talked about my father, except that he had left before I was born. Richard felt a lump in his throat. I never knew about your existence, Emma. If I had known, well, things would have been very different. A heavy silence settled between them. Emma seemed to be struggling internally, trying to reconcile everything she knew about her life with this new information. Why would my mother hide this? She finally asked, her voice breaking. Why would she lie to both of us? Richard shook his head, feeling the weight of guilt that wasn't entirely his. I don't know, Emma. Maybe she had her reasons. Maybe she wanted to protect us somehow. Protect us? Emma laughed bitterly. I grew up without a father. You missed years of my life. What kind of protection is that? Her words hit him like a punch. Richard felt tears forming in his own eyes. I know. Believe me, if I could go back, but we can't change the past. We can only decide what to do from now on. Emma stared at him, her eyes full of conflicting emotions. And what exactly do you want to do? Richard hesitated. What did he want? He really hadn't thought beyond this moment. I would like to get to know you, Emma. Know who you are, what you like, what your dreams are. And if you allow, I would like to be part of your life. I know I can't recover the lost years, but maybe we can build something from now on. Emma remained silent for a long moment, processing everything. When she spoke, her voice was low but firm. I need time to think. This fears come, it's too much to absorb all at once, and frankly, I don't know if I can trust you yet. Richard nodded, feeling a mixture of disappointment and understanding. Of course I understand. Take the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready to talk again. He took a card from his pocket and handed it to her. My number and email are there. You can contact me whenever you want for whatever reason. Emma took the card hesitantly, as if it were something fragile and dangerous at the same time. Thank you, she murmured. I need to go now. Richard watched her stand up, desperately wanting to say more, do more, but he knew he needed to respect her space. Emma, he called when she was already a few steps away. She turned. Regardless of what you decide, I want you to know that I'm happy to have found you. She looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, with a brief nod, she turned and left, leaving Richard alone on the park bench. The sun set, painting the sky in orange hues. Richard remained seated, lost in thought. The meeting hadn't been exactly as he had imagined, but it was a start. An uncertain, fragile start, but a start nonetheless. Now, all he could do was wait and hope that Emma would decide to give this new and unexpected relationship a chance. The future, which once seemed so clear and planned, was now a sea of unknown possibilities. The days following the meeting in the park were an emotional roller coaster for Richard. Each phone ring, each email that arrived, made his heart leap, hoping it was Emma getting in touch, but days passed without a word from her. At work, Richard struggled to maintain a facade of normalcy, but his employees noticed the change. The man who was always so focused and decisive now seemed distracted, lost in thought. On a particularly difficult afternoon, Martha, his secretary, couldn't stand seeing her boss in that state anymore. Mr. Morgan, she said, entering his office, with a cup of coffee. Excuse the intrusion, but you're not well. Is there anything I can help with? Richard looked at Martha, considering. After so many years of loyalty, perhaps it was time to trust someone. Martha, he began hesitantly, what would you do if you discovered you have a daughter you never knew existed? Martha's eyes widened in surprise. "Oh, Mr. Morgan, that's... Did this happen to you?" Richard nodded, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders just by sharing. "Yes, she's 24 years old. I just found out." Martha sat down, absorbing the information. "And her mother?" "Eleanor," Richard answered, his voice laden with emotion. "It happened during our brief separation before the wedding. She never told me." "Oh, Richard," Martha said, forgetting formality in the face of the gravity of the situation. "That's unbelievable. How are you handling this?" Richard laughed humorlessly. "Honestly, I don't know. I feel lost, guilty for not being there, angry with Eleanor for hiding this, and at the same time anxious to get to know Emma, to make up for lost time." "Emma," Martha repeated the name softly. "Does she know about you now?" "Yes, we met. But she asked for time to process everything. I don't blame her. It's a lot to absorb." Martha was silent for a moment, thoughtful. "You know, Richard, maybe it's good to give her that time, and to yourself too. It's a delicate situation which needs to be handled with care." Richard nodded, grateful for Martha's wisdom. "You're right, but it's hard to wait, knowing she's out there." "Use this time to prepare," Martha suggested. "Think about what you want to say to her, the kind of relationship you hope to build, and perhaps it's time to revisit some memories of Eleanor. There might be clues you didn't notice before." Martha's words ignited an idea in Richard. There was a box of Eleanor's belongings that he had kept after her passing, but never had the courage to open. Perhaps it was time to face that past. That night in his apartment, Richard sat on the living room floor, Eleanor's box before him. With trembling hands, he opened it. Her perfume, still preserved after so many years, hit him immediately, bringing a wave of memories, photos, letters, small objects that told the story of a love he thought he knew so well. At the bottom of the box, an envelope caught his attention. It was addressed to him in Eleanor's unmistakable handwriting. With racing heart, Richard opened it. "My dear Richard, if you are reading this, it's because I am no longer there to tell this story in person. There is so much I wanted to tell you, so many truths I have carried in silence for years. During our separation, I discovered I was pregnant. It was a moment of fear and confusion. I didn't know if we were ready, if our relationship would survive this. In a moment of weakness and fear, I decided not to tell you. Our daughter Emma was born, and I left her in the care of my sister in the small town. I returned to you, determined to build our life together, but the secret gnawed at me from within. Years passed, and the more time went by, the harder it became to tell the truth. I saw the joy in your eyes when we talked about having children, and the guilt consumed me. I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. What I did was unforgivable, but I ask that if one day you discover about Emma, don't blame her. She is innocent in all this. Love her as I know you would have loved her, if you had known from the beginning. Emma is with my sister Anne in the town of Oakwood. She deserves to know the truth, and you deserve to meet her. Forgive me, my love. I hope one day you can understand that even in my mistakes, I only wanted to protect those I love. Always yours, Eleanor." Tears streamed freely down Richard's face as he finished reading. Years of doubts, of unanswered questions, finally gained clarity. The pain of betrayal mingled with understanding of the fear and guilt that Eleanor had carried for so many years. With trembling hands, he picked up the phone. There was a call he needed to make, a bridge he needed to build. "Hello, Emma. This is Richard. I think we have a lot to talk about." The coffee was hot and aromatic, but Richard barely noticed it. His eyes were fixed on the cafe door, his heart beating, an anxious rhythm against his ribs. After the call the night before, Emma had agreed to meet him again. This time he had Eleanor's letter, a crucial piece of the puzzle they were both trying to solve. The bell above the door chimed, and Emma entered. Her eyes scanned the environment until they found Richard. There was hesitation in her steps as she approached the table. "Hello," she said softly, sitting down. "Thank you for coming," Richard replied, his voice laden with emotion. I found something I think you need to see." Carefully, he took the letter from his pocket and handed it to Emma. "It's from your mother. She left this for me." Emma looked at the envelope with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Richard watched in silence as she read, seeing emotions dance across her face: surprise, pain, understanding, and finally, a deep sadness. When she finished, Emma looked up, unshed tears glistening in her eyes. She planned to tell us. She just didn't have time." Richard nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. "I know, I wish we had had that chance." A heavy silence fell over them, full of unspoken words and lost years. It was Emma who finally broke it. "You know, growing up without a father, I always imagined 1,000 different scenarios. That he was a secret hero, a time traveler. Anything beyond simply absent." She paused, her eyes meeting Richard's. "I never imagined he could be so close and at the same time so far." Richard felt the weight of these words. "Emma, I know nothing I say can make up for the lost years, but I want you to know that if I had known, if I had had the slightest idea, you would have been there," Emma completed softly. "I believe you, it's just that it's hard, you know, reconciling the image I had of my absent father with you." Richard understood what she meant. He himself was struggling. To see himself as a father, to understand this new role in his life. "I understand," he said, "and I don't expect things to change overnight. But I would like to try, to get to know you, to be part of your life if you allow." Emma was silent for a moment, considering. Then, to Richard's surprise, a small smile appeared on her lips. "You know, there's one thing I always wanted to ask my father," she said. "What?" Richard asked, anxious. "What was my mother like when she was young, before me, before all this?" The question caught Richard by surprise, but soon a nostalgic smile spread across his face. "Oh, Eleanor, she was amazing. Full of life, you know. She had this way of entering a room and immediately lighting everything up, and determined, my God, when she set her mind to something." And so, over cups of coffee that cooled forgotten, Richard began to share stories of Eleanor. Emma listened avidly, her eyes shining with each new revelation about the woman she had known only as a mother, but who now gained new dimensions. The hours passed unnoticed. The sun was beginning to set when they finally noticed how much time had passed. I think we need to go," Emma said, seeming almost reluctant. Richard nodded, feeling a mixture of joy for the time shared and sadness for having to end it. "Yes, you're right, but can we do this again, maybe dinner next week?" Emma hesitated for a moment, then smiled. "I'd like that. Maybe you can tell me more about your work. I've always been curious about what it's like to run a hotel chain." Richard's heart filled with a hope he hadn't felt in years. Of course, I'd love to. And maybe you can tell me more about yourself. Your dreams, your plans. "It's a start," Emma said, standing up. Before leaving, she turned to Richard one last time. "Thank you for sharing the letter, for wanting to try." Richard felt tears forming in his eyes. "No, Emma, thank you for giving me this chance." As he watched her leave the cafe, Richard felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The path ahead would be long and, no doubt, full of challenges, but for the first time in weeks he felt ready to face them. With a deep sigh, he stood up, leaving behind the empty cups and taking with him the promise of a new beginning. The journey to becoming a father, to getting to know his daughter, was just beginning, and Richard was determined to make every moment count. The weeks that followed brought a new routine to Richard's life. The weekly dinners with Emma became a focal point in his schedule, precious moments that he eagerly awaited. Each meeting was a mixture of discoveries, nervous laughter, and sometimes uncomfortable but deeply meaningful silences. On a particularly pleasant evening, they met at a cozy Italian restaurant in the city center. The aroma of fresh pasta and aromatic sauces filled the air, creating a welcoming atmosphere. "So," Richard began after they placed their orders, "how was your week?" Emma played with her napkin, A habit that Richard noticed was a sign of nervousness. It was interesting. Actually, something happened that I wanted to share with you. Richard's heart raced. These moments of openness were still rare and precious. Of course, I'm listening. Well, she continued, I received a job offer. A big marketing company wants to hire me as a social media manager. Emma, that's wonderful, Richard exclaimed, genuinely happy for her. Congratulations. A shy smile blossomed on her lips. Thank you, it's a great opportunity, but, Richard encouraged, feeling there was more. Emma sighed. But it's in New York. I would have to move. Richard's smile faltered for a moment. New York, miles away, just when they were starting to build something. Oh, was all he managed to say initially. Then, gathering courage, he continued, Well, that's an important decision. What are you thinking of doing? Emma looked him in the eyes, a mixture of emotions on her face. Honestly, I don't know. It's an incredible opportunity for my career, but there are other considerations now. Richard understood what she wasn't saying. He was one of those considerations. The idea warmed and frightened him at the same time. Emma, he said softly, I don't want you to feel trapped because of me. I know we're just beginning to get to know each other, but I don't want to be an obstacle to your dreams. She seemed surprised by his words. You wouldn't mind if I went? Richard took a deep breath. Of course I would mind. The idea of you being far away, it's not easy. But more than anything, I want you to be happy and fulfilled. If this job is what you want, then you should go for it. Emma's eyes filled with tears. You know, for years I imagined what it would be like to have this conversation with my father, asking for advice, sharing dreams. And now here we are. Richard felt a lump in his throat. I know. It's surreal, isn't it? But I'm happy we're having this chance now. The waiter arrived with their plates, momentarily interrupting the conversation. When they were alone again, Emma spoke. There's another thing I wanted to ask you. What is it? Richard inquired, curious. If I decide to go, would you come? Visit me in New York? The question caught Richard by surprise. It was an invitation, an opening he hadn't expected so soon. I'd love to, he replied, feeling a wave of emotion. If you want, of course. Emma smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her face. I do want that. I think I'd like to show you my world, you know. The places I like, the people who are important to me. Richard nodded, moved. It would be an honor, Emma. Truly. They ate in comfortable silence for a few moments, each lost in their own thoughts. Then Richard had an idea. You know, he began, if you decide to go to New York, maybe I can help somehow. I don't want to intrude, but I have some contacts there who could make your move easier, help find a good apartment. Emma gently interrupted him. Richard, I appreciate it, but I think I need to do this on my own, understand? It's important to me. Richard felt a pang of disappointment, but also pride. Of course I understand. Sorry if it sounded like I was trying to control things. No, it's not that, Emma assured. It's just that all my life I wondered about you. I imagined what it would be like to have a father. And now that I've found you, I want to build this relationship, but I also need to maintain my independence. I hope you understand. Richard smiled, moved by her maturity and honesty. I understand and I respect that. I'm here for whatever you need, but at your pace and on your terms. The rest of the dinner transpired in a lighter atmosphere. They shared stories, laughed at silly jokes, and gradually felt more comfortable with each other. As they said goodbye on the sidewalk in front of the restaurant, there was a new energy between them, a mutual understanding, a growing respect. Thank you. How are you for dinner? Emma said. And thank you for understanding. Richard nodded. Always. And Emma, whatever your decision about New York, I'll be here. Always. She smiled and on an impulse gave Richard a quick hug. It was brief but meaningful, a small step but in the right direction. As he watched Emma walk away, Richard felt a mixture of emotions, pride, apprehension, hope. The future was uncertain, but one thing he knew: no matter the distance, he would do everything to be the father Emma deserved, even if that meant letting her fly. The airport was busy that Sunday morning. The buzz of voices, the sound of luggage being dragged, and the intermittent announcements from the loudspeakers created a familiar symphony of farewells and new beginnings. Richard stood near the departure gate, his heart a mixture of pride and apprehension. Beside him, Emma seemed nervous but determined. Her bags were packed, her one-way ticket to New York secure in her hands. The decision to accept the job had been difficult, but Richard knew it was the right choice for her. "Are you sure you haven't forgotten anything?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Emma smiled, recognizing the concern behind the question. "Yes, Dad. I checked everything 3 times as you suggested." The word Dad still caught him by surprise sometimes, sending a wave of emotion through him. In the last few weeks since the night of the Italian dinner, Emma had begun to use it occasionally. Each time was like a precious gift to Richard. "Great," he replied, smiling back. "And remember, if you need anything—" I know, Emma gently interrupted him. "You're just a phone call away. Don't worry so much, okay? It's not like I'm going to another planet." Richard laughed, recognizing his own anxiety. "Sorry, I guess I'm trying to make up for 24 years of paternal worry all at once." The comment brought a moment of seriousness. Emma placed her hand on Richard's arm, her touch soft and comforting. "Hey," she said softly, "we'll figure this out, right? It's not goodbye, it's just, see you later." Richard nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. "You're right. And hey, I'll be there in 2 weeks to visit, as we planned." "I can't wait," Emma smiled. "I'll show you all my favorite spots in the city." The announcement of Emma's flight boarding echoed through the terminal. It was time. "Well," Emma said, picking up her bags, "I guess this is it." Richard pulled her into a hug, trying to convey all the love and pride he felt. "Go and conquer the world, daughter. I'll be here cheering for you." When they separated, both had tears in their eyes. Emma gave one last smile and then turned, walking toward her new future. Richard stood there watching until she disappeared into the boarding area. His heart was heavy but also full of hope. It was a new chapter for both of them. In the weeks that followed, Richard found himself in a completely new routine. Daily calls with Emma became the highlight of his days. He listened attentively as she described her new job, her colleagues, the challenges and victories of each day. In his office, Martha noticed the change in her boss. Richard seemed lighter, more animated, as if he had found a new purpose. "You seem happy," she commented one day as she handed him some documents to sign. Richard smiled, looking at the photo of Emma that now adorned his desk. "You know, Martha, I am. It's like I've been given a second chance in life." Martha nodded, understanding. "It's good to see you this way. And how is Emma adapting to New York?" "Oh, she's doing very well," Richard replied with evident pride in his voice. "Yesterday, she told me she received praise from her boss for her first project. Isn't that amazing?" The conversation was interrupted by the ringing of the phone. It was from the finance department, something about an urgent report. Richard sighed, switching back to executive mode. "Sorry, Martha. Duty calls." As he dealt with work issues, Richard found himself thinking about how his life had changed. A few months ago, his focus was exclusively on business. Now, although still dedicated to work, there was a different balance. Each decision, each plan for the future now took Emma into consideration. At night in his apartment, Richard was preparing for his trip to New York. As he packed his suitcase, his gaze fell upon an old photo of Eleanor. He picked it up, feeling a mixture of longing and gratitude. "Ah, Eleanor," he murmured to the photo. "I wish you could see our girl now. She's amazing, you know? Strong, intelligent, determined, just like you." A tear rolled down his face, but Richard smiled. There was a peace in his heart that he hadn't felt in years. The past still hurt, but the present was full of promises, and the future, well, the future was an adventure he could hardly wait to live. Carefully placing the photo in his suitcase, Richard finished preparing for the trip. Tomorrow he would be in New York, seeing Emma's new world through her eyes. It was scary and exciting at the same time. Lying down to sleep, Richard reflected on how life could change in an instant. A casual encounter in a cafe had triggered a series of events that completely transformed his existence. And although the path ahead was still uncertain, one thing was clear: he was no longer alone on this journey. With that comforting thought, Richard fell asleep, dreaming of the new horizons that awaited him. Tomorrow would bring challenges, no doubt, but it would also bring the promise of more shared moments, more laughter, more discoveries. And for Richard, that was more than enough. The plane landed smoothly at LaGuardia Airport in New York. Richard felt his heart race as the pilot announced their arrival. After weeks of anticipation, he was finally in the same city as Emma. As he exited the arrivals area, his eyes anxiously scanned the crowd. That's when he saw her, smiling and waving energetically. Emma looked different, more confident, more radiant. The big city had already left its mark on her. "Dad!" she exclaimed, hugging him tightly. The term of endearment, now used more naturally, warmed Richard's heart. "Hi, sweetheart," he replied, returning the hug. "So good to see you." The journey from the airport to Emma's apartment was filled with animated conversations. She talked about her work, her new friends, the challenges of adapting to such a large and bustling city. "It's amazing, Dad," she said, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. "Sometimes it's scary, but I feel like I'm exactly where I should be, you." "No?" Richard nodded, feeling a mixture of pride and a pang of longing. "I'm glad you're adapting well. Your mother would have been proud." The mention of Eleanor brought a moment of reflective silence. Emma then asked softly, "Do you think she would approve? All of this, us?" Richard thought for a moment before answering, "I'm sure she would. Eleanor always wanted the best for you, and as for us, well, I think she would be happy that we found each other, even if late." Arriving at Emma's apartment, Richard was impressed by how welcoming the space was. Small but decorated with touches that reminded him of both Eleanor and Emma's emerging personality. "It's beautiful," he commented, noticing the photos on the wall, including a recent one of the two of them. Emma smiled, a bit shy. "Thank you. I'm still settling in, but I already feel at home here." The next few days were an immersion in Emma's world. She took him to see her workplace, introduced him to some of her new friends, and guided him through her favorite places in the city. On a sunny afternoon, as they walked through Central Park, Emma surprised Richard with a question. "Dad, have you ever thought about expanding your hotels to New York?" Richard looked at her, intrigued. "Well, I've considered it a few times, but never followed through with the idea." "Why?" Emma hesitated for a moment before continuing. "It's just that, well, I've been researching the market here. There's a growing demand for luxury hotels with a more personal touch, you know, something that stands out from the big international chains." Richard was impressed with Emma's insight. "You're right. That's a very perceptive observation. And I thought," she continued, gaining confidence, "that maybe we could work on this together. I could help with the digital marketing part, social, media. It would be a way to combine our experiences." The proposal caught Richard by surprise. It was more than he could have hoped for. Not just a chance to get closer to Emma, but also an opportunity to share his legacy with her. "Emma, that's a wonderful idea," he said, moved. "Are you sure? It would be a big commitment." She nodded, determined. "I am. I think it would be good for both of us, personally and professionally. Besides," she added with a smile, "it would be an excuse for you to come to New York more often." Richard laughed, feeling a wave of affection. "As if I needed an excuse to visit my daughter." In the days that followed, between walks and dinners, they began to sketch plans for the possible venture in New York. Richard was impressed with Emma's business vision, her understanding of the digital market, and her innovative energy. On the eve of his departure, sitting on the balcony of Emma's apartment, observing the sunset over the city, Richard felt a deep sense of fulfillment. "You know," he began, "when I found out about you, I was terrified. I thought I had lost so much that we could never make up for lost time." Emma looked at him, curious. "And now?" Richard smiled, his eyes shining with contained emotion. "Now I realize that every moment we spend together is a gift. We can't change the past, but we can build an incredible future." Emma took his hand, squeezing it gently. "I'm glad you came into my life, Dad, even if it took a while." "Me too, sweetheart," Richard replied, his voice choked. "Me too." As night fell over New York, father and daughter remained there, sharing a comfortable silence. The future stretched before them, full of possibilities. A new chapter was about to begin, one they would write together. Richard knew that challenges would come, balancing work and family, navigating this new dynamic, facing the ghosts of the past. But looking at Emma, seeing in her the best of Eleanor and himself, he felt ready to face anything. The city that once seemed so distant and intimidating had now become a symbol of new beginnings, of second chances. New York, the city of encounters, had united father and daughter in a way neither could have predicted. And so, under the starry sky of New York, Richard and Emma silently sealed a pact of love, understanding, and a shared future. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but they would face them together as a family. The months following Richard's visit to New York were a whirlwind of activities. The project for the new hotel in the city quickly moved from the field of ideas to reality. Richard divided his time between his hometown and the capital, balancing the management of his existing businesses with the new venture. Emma, in turn, threw herself headfirst into the project. Her skills in digital marketing and her understanding of the dynamics of the big city proved invaluable. She coordinated the online presence of the future hotel, created promotional strategies, and helped shape the visual identity of the venture. On a Saturday afternoon, father and daughter were gathered in the temporary office they had set up in New York. Architectural plans, fabric samples, and color palettes covered the table between them. "What if we used warmer tones here?" Emma suggested, pointing to the lobby project. "I think it would match better with the welcoming concept we want to convey." Richard considered for a moment, then smiled. "You know, you're right. It's exactly the kind of detail that makes a difference. Your mother would have loved this. She always had a keen eye for design." The mention of Eleanor brought a moment of reflection for both. Although conversations about her had become more frequent and less painful, there was still a hint of melancholy when her name came up. "What was she like in business?" Emma asked, curious. "Did you work together?" Richard leaned back in his chair, his eyes gaining a nostalgic gleam. "Oh, she was incredible, had a natural instinct for hospitality. In fact, it was her idea to transform our first inn into a boutique hotel. It was the turning point for our business." Emma listened attentively, absorbing every detail. These stories were like pieces of a puzzle, helping her form a more complete picture of her mother and her own legacy. "Sometimes," she said softly, "I wonder what she would think of all this, of us working together, building something new." Richard extended his hand, holding Emma's. "I'm sure she would be proud, of you especially. You have a lot of her in you, you know. The creativity, the determination." The moment was interrupted by the ring of Emma's cell phone. It was her boss at the marketing agency. "Sorry," she said, answering the call. "Hello? Yes, I understand. No, it's okay. I can solve this." Richard watched as Emma talked, noticing the growing tension in her posture. When she hung up, she looked worried. "Everything okay?" he asked. Emma sighed. "More or less. A problem came up with one of the agency's main clients. I'll have to work this weekend to resolve it." "Oh," Richard replied, feeling a pang of disappointment. They had planned to spend Sunday together, visiting possible locations for the hotel. "Well, we can postpone our visit if you need to." Emma bit her lip, clearly torn. "I'm so sorry, Dad. It's complicated to balance all this, you know? The agency work, our project." Richard nodded, understanding. "I understand, sweetheart. Don't worry, the hotel project can wait." But as the days passed, It became clear that balancing the demands of Emma's job with the hotel project was becoming increasingly challenging. The nightly calls to discuss ideas became less frequent, replaced by hurried messages and concise emails. One night during a video conference, the tension finally came to the surface. "Emma, have you reviewed the budgets I sent?" Richard asked, noticing the fatigue on his daughter's face. "Sorry, Dad," she replied, rubbing her eyes. "I had a crazy week at the agency. I haven't had time yet." Richard felt a pang of frustration. "I understand you're busy, but we need to keep the schedule. Maybe we should rethink your involvement in the project if..." "If what?" Emma interrupted, her voice gaining a defensive tone. "If I can't handle it? I'm doing the best I can, you know?" I know, Richard tried to calm the situation. "I didn't mean..." "Look," Emma cut him off again. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I've overcommitted. After all, I don't have your experience, do I?" The bitterness in her voice caught Richard by surprise. "Emma, that's not it. I'm just worried. About the project, about you." "Well, you don't need to worry," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. "I can handle it. I always have." Before Richard could respond, Emma ended the call, leaving him staring at an empty screen, feeling lost and confused. In the days that followed, communication between them was tense and minimal. Richard wondered if he had pushed too hard, if he had been insensitive to Emma's needs. She in turn struggled with feelings of inadequacy and the fear of disappointing the father she barely knew. The hotel project, which before seemed like a shared dream, now loomed between them like a cloud of uncertainty. Richard knew they needed to talk, really talk, before the gap between them became unbridgeable. Meanwhile, in New York, Emma stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror of the agency, silent tears streaming down her face. She wanted to prove her worth, wanted to make Richard proud, but the weight of expectations, both his and her own, seemed overwhelming. Building a father-daughter relationship was challenging enough on its own. Adding the dynamics of a business partnership to the mix was proving to be more complicated than either of them had anticipated. As night fell over two different cities, both Richard and Emma found themselves at a crossroads. The path ahead would demand more than business strategies and marketing plans. It would require honesty, vulnerability, and the courage to put the relationship first, above any project or venture. The real challenge, they were discovering, wasn't building a hotel, but building a family. The silence between Richard and Emma extended for days that seemed endless. Each, in their own city, struggled with their thoughts and insecurities. Richard spent sleepless nights in his apartment, replaying every word of the last conversation, wondering where he had gone wrong. Emma, in turn, immersed herself in work at the agency, as if she could push away her internal conflicts through excessive activity. It was Martha, Richard's loyal secretary, who finally broke the impasse. "Mr. Morgan," she said, entering his office with a determined expression, "forgive the intrusion, but I can no longer stay silent. You need to talk to your daughter." Richard looked at her, surprised by the unusual assertiveness. "Martha, No, please, listen to me," she gently interrupted. "I've spent years watching you build this empire, always focused, always in control. But now you're building something much more important, a family. And families, Mr. Morgan, require more than business strategies. They require the courage to be vulnerable." Martha's words hit Richard like lightning. She was right, of course. He was treating his relationship with Emma as he would a business negotiation, and that was driving them apart. "Thank you, Martha," he said, standing up. "You're absolutely right. I think it's time for a trip to New York." A few hours later, Richard was on the plane, his heart heavy but determined. He hadn't told Emma he was coming. Part of him feared she would refuse to see him if she knew in advance. In New York, Emma was at the agency office working late once again. Her phone rang, displaying a message from a colleague. "Hey, Em, there's a gentleman here at reception, asking for you. Said he's your father. What should I do?" Emma felt her heart race. Richard was there, why? For a moment she considered saying she was busy, postponing the confrontation, but something inside her knew it was time to face the situation. "Tell him I'm coming down," she replied. Minutes later, Emma found Richard in the reception. He looked tired, worried, but his eyes lit up when he saw her. "Hi, Dad," she said softly. "Hi, sweetheart," Richard replied. "Sorry to show up like this without warning. I thought we needed to talk. In person." Emma nodded, feeling a lump in her throat. "You're right, let's take a walk." They walked out into the New York night, walking side by side in silence for a few blocks. It was Richard who finally broke the ice. "Emma, I'm so sorry," he began. "I realized I've been treating our relationship and this hotel project like I would any other business, and that's not fair to you." Emma looked at him, surprised by the frankness. "I also apologize, Dad, I think I was so anxious to prove my worth, to show that I can be part of your world, that I ended up overwhelming myself." They stopped at a small square, sitting on a bench. Richard took Emma's hands in his. "Sweetheart, you don't need to prove anything to me. You're my daughter. That in itself is already more than I ever dreamed of having. Everything else, the hotel, the business, that's secondary." Tears began to form in Emma's eyes. "But I want to be part of all this. I want to work with you, learn from you. It's just that. Sometimes it feels like I'm trying to make up for 24 years of absence in a few months." Richard felt his heart tighten. "Oh, Emma, I understand, and know that there's nothing you can do to disappoint me. I'm proud of you no matter what happens." They were silent for a moment, letting the words be absorbed. Then Emma spoke. "You know, maybe we should rethink how we're approaching this hotel project." Richard looked at her, curious. "What do you mean?" "Well, what if, instead of me trying to fit into your business world, we created something new together, something that combines your experience with my ideas, a hotel that's truly ours, not just an extension of what you've already built?" The idea lit up Richard's eyes. "That's brilliant, Emma. A new beginning for the hotel and for us." They spent the next few hours there, on that park bench, reimagining the hotel project. It wouldn't be just another in the Morgan chain, but something unique. A hotel that would tell their story of separation, reunion, and new beginnings. When the sun began to rise, painting the New York sky with shades of pink and orange, Richard and Emma had not only a new business plan, but a deeper understanding of each other. "Thank you for coming here, Dad," Emma said, hugging him. "Whenever you need, sweetheart," Richard replied, his voice choked with emotion. "Always." As they walked back to Emma's apartment, both felt they had crossed an important bridge. Challenges would still come, certainly, but now they knew they could face them together as a true family. The new day dawning in New York symbolized more than just the beginning of a new project. It was the dawn of a new phase in their relationship, one in which mutual understanding and unconditional love would be the foundation of everything they would build together from then on. The following months brought a new dynamic for Richard and Emma. The hotel project, now reimagined, came to life with renewed enthusiasm. They decided to call it Dawn, symbolizing not only the new beginning in their relationship, but also the promise of a new day for the guests who would stay there. On a sunny Saturday morning, father and daughter were at the site where the Dawn Hotel would be built. The location, overlooking Central Park, was perfect, a blend of nature and urbanity that reflected the essence of what they wanted to create. "It's amazing, isn't it?" Emma said, her eyes shining with excitement as she watched the architects and engineers moving around the site. "To think that in a few months, all this will be our hotel." Richard smiled, feeling the same enthusiasm. "Yes, it's wonderful, and you know what's most amazing? Seeing it through your eyes. Your energy has given a new life to this project, Emma." She blushed slightly at the compliment. "Thank you, Dad. But it's the teamwork that's making this happen. Your experience, my ideas, and the memory of your mother," Richard completed softly. "I think she would be proud to see this." Emma nodded, feeling a mixture of joy and a twinge of sadness. "I wish she could be here to see it." "In a way, she is," Richard replied, putting his arm around his daughter's shoulders. "In every detail we choose, in every decision we make, her spirit is in all of this." They stood there for a moment, absorbing the view and the meaning of what they were building. It wasn't just a hotel, but a testament to their journey together. As the project progressed, Richard and Emma found a work rhythm that worked for both of them. Emma continued at her job at the marketing agency, but now with a better balance between her responsibilities there and on the hotel project. Richard, in turn, began to divide his time more evenly between his hometown and New York. One night during a dinner celebrating the start of construction, Emma surprised Richard with a question. "Dad, have you ever thought about moving permanently to New York?" Richard almost choked on his wine. "Move? Well, I confess the idea has crossed my mind, but, Emma encouraged. He sighed. "It's complicated, sweetheart. I have a whole life established there. The company headquarters, my friends." Emma nodded, understanding. "I get it. It's just that. Well, it's been so nice having you around more frequently. And with the hotel here," Richard felt his heart tighten with the implicit desire in Emma's words. "Look, I won't say it's not tempting. The idea of being closer to you, of being able to follow Dawn closely, it's something to think about seriously." Emma's face lit up with the possibility. "Really, you would actually consider it?" "Actually, of course," Richard replied, smiling. "After all, the best part of building this hotel has been spending more time with you. Maybe it's time to make that something more permanent." In the days that followed, the idea of a move to New York began to take shape in Richard's mind. He found himself imagining what it would be like to wake up every day in the same city as his daughter, to be able to meet her for coffee before work, to be present in the important moments of her life. Meanwhile, the Dawn Hotel was taking shape. The foundations were laid, and soon the walls began to rise. Each stage was celebrated by Richard and Emma as a small victory. One day, while supervising the installation of the large glass panels that would form the facade of the hotel, Emma had an idea. "What if we did something special to honor Mom in the hotel?" Richard looked at her, intrigued. "What kind of thing do you have in mind?" "Well," Emma continued, her eyes shining with enthusiasm, "remember that phrase of hers about coffee? What if we created a special cafe in the lobby called Twice? We could have her phrase engraved somewhere, as a subtle reminder of where it all began." Richard felt tears forming in his eyes. "Emma, that's perfect. A beautiful way to honor your mother and our story." The cafe project quickly became a favorite of both. They spent hours discussing every detail, from the counter design to the selection of coffee beans that would be served. As the Dawn Hotel came to life, Richard felt he was witnessing not just the birth of a new venture, but the blossoming of something much more precious, his relationship with Emma. One afternoon, as they watched the sunset from the top of the building under construction, Richard made a decision. "Emma," he said, his voice firm, "I've decided. I'm moving to New York." Her eyes widened in surprise and joy. "Really? Dad, that's wonderful." Richard smiled, feeling a peace he hadn't experienced in years. "Yes, it's true. I realized I don't want to miss another moment of your life. And besides," he added with a mischievous smile, "someone needs to make sure this hotel is a success, right?" Emma hugged him tightly, laughing and crying at the same time. "Thank you, Dad. This means a lot to me." As the sun set over the city, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, Richard and Emma remained embraced, their silhouettes outlined against the New York skyline. The Dawn Hotel, still under construction below them, was a silent witness to their journey, a journey of reconciliation, discovery, and, above all, love. The future stretched out before them, full of promises and possibilities. And for the first time in a long time, both Richard and Emma felt they were exactly where they should be, building not just a hotel but a home, a family, and a legacy that would last far beyond their own lives. The day of Richard's move to New York dawned sunny, as if the sky itself celebrated this new phase. Emma was there to welcome him, helping to organize the boxes in the new apartment he had bought, not far from hers and the Dawn Hotel. "Welcome to your new home, Dad," Emma said, smiling as she opened the curtains, letting the New York sunlight flood the living room. Richard looked around, feeling a mixture of emotions. There was a touch of nostalgia for leaving the city where he had lived for so many years, but a sense of expectation and joy for what was to come prevailed. "Thank you, sweetheart," he replied, hugging her. "You know, I never thought that before I would be starting a new life in another city, but here I am and I couldn't be happier." The days that followed were a whirlwind of activities. Between unpacking boxes and becoming familiar with the new neighborhood, Richard and Emma immersed themselves in the final preparations for the Dawn Hotel's inauguration, which was scheduled for a few weeks away. One afternoon, while supervising the installation of furniture in the lobby, Emma noticed something. "Dad, look!" she exclaimed, pointing to one of the walls. "The plaque with Mom's phrase has arrived." Together, they approached the elegant brushed metal plaque, where the phrase that had started it all was engraved. "Coffee can burn twice, on the tongue and in the heart." Richard gently ran his fingers over the letters, feeling a lump in his throat. "It's perfect," he murmured. "Eleanor would be proud." Emma linked her arm with her father's. "She is proud, I'm sure, of both of us." In the days leading up to the inauguration, the Dawn Hotel came to life. The staff, carefully selected and trained, moved through the corridors, adjusting the final details. The aroma of fresh coffee filled the air of the Twice Cafe, which had quickly become the heart of the hotel. On the eve of the grand opening, Richard and Emma decided to spend the night at the hotel, being the first official guests. After a light dinner in the still empty restaurant, they went up to the terrace from where they had a panoramic view of New York. "It's incredible, isn't it?" Emma said, looking at the illuminated city. "To think that a year ago I didn't even know you existed, and now, all this." Richard nodded, moved. "Life has surprising ways of giving us gifts sometimes. You know, for years I thought my legacy would be just this hotel chain. Now I realize that my true legacy is you, Emma. You and this hotel we built together." Emma smiled, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Thank you, Dad, for everything, for giving me a chance, for believing in me." "No, sweetheart," Richard gently interrupted her. "I'm the one who thanks you, for giving me the chance to be your father, even if belatedly. For teaching me that it's never too late to start over." They stood there embraced, watching the city that was now home to both. The silence between them was comfortable, full of mutual understanding and love. The next morning, the day of the inauguration arrived with a palpable energy in the air. Richard and Emma were in the lobby, welcoming the first guests, journalists, influencers, business partners, and close friends. The crucial moment came when Richard positioned himself to make the opening speech. Emma was by his side, radiant in an elegant blue dress. "Welcome to the Dawn Hotel," Richard began, his voice firm but moved. "This hotel is more than just another venture. It's the realization of a dream, a testament to second chances and new beginnings." He paused, looking at Emma with pride. "This project would not have been possible without the vision and dedication of my daughter Emma. She not only helped me create this hotel, but taught me the true meaning of family." Emma smiled, squeezing her father's hand in silent support. "Dawn," Richard continued, "is dedicated to the memory of Eleanor Davis, an extraordinary woman who inspired us in ways we could never have imagined. Her spirit of welcome and care is in every detail of this place." As Richard spoke, Emma observed the faces of the guests. There was admiration, curiosity, and in some, visible emotion. Their story of separation and reunion, of love and forgiveness, was touching hearts. After the speech, the doors of the Dawn Hotel were officially opened. The guests explored the luxurious spaces, praising the innovative design and welcoming atmosphere. At the Twice Cafe, many stopped to read the plaque with Eleanor's phrase, some smiling, others silently reflecting on its meaning. As the day progressed, Richard and Emma circulated among the guests, sharing stories, answering questions, and receiving compliments. It was evident to everyone that Dawn was not just another luxury hotel. It was a place with soul, with a story to tell. As night fell, when the last guests said goodbye, Richard and Emma found themselves again in the lobby, exhausted but radiant. "We did it, Dad," Emma said, her voice full of emotion and pride. Richard hugged her tight. "Yes, my dear, we did. And this is just the beginning." As they watched the first official guests arriving, father and daughter felt a deep sense of accomplishment. The Dawn Hotel wasn't just a successful venture, it was the symbol of their journey, a monument to love, perseverance, and the possibility of new beginnings. And there, in the heart of New York, under the starry sky, Richard and Emma knew that, no matter what the future held, they would face it together, as the family they had always been destined to be. The months following the Dawn Hotel's inauguration were a roller coaster of emotions and challenges for Richard and Emma. The hotel quickly became one of the most talked about in New York, attracting guests from all over the United States and abroad. The story behind its creation, the rediscovered father-daughter relationship, added a special touch that captivated visitors. On a Saturday morning, Richard and Emma were at the Twice Cafe, tasting the special blend they had created in honor of Eleanor. The place was full with guests and locals enjoying the welcoming atmosphere. "Look at this," Emma said, smiling as she observed the movement. "Who would have thought we'd be here 6 months later, with so much success?" Richard nodded, his eyes shining with pride. "It's amazing, isn't it? But you know, the real success for me isn't in the numbers or the positive reviews." "No?" Emma asked, curious. "No," he replied, taking her hand. "The real success is being here with you, seeing how much we've grown together in this process." Emma felt tears forming in her eyes. "Oh, Dad, I feel the same. This hotel, it gave us much more than a successful business. It gave us a family." At that moment, one of the managers approached, looking a bit anxious. "Mr. Morgan, Miss Emma, sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation with a VIP guest on the 12th floor. He's unhappy with the room and is threatening to make a scene on social media." Richard and Emma exchanged glances. It was time to put to the test everything they had learned together. "Let's go," Richard said, standing up. "Let's solve this as a team." When they reached the 12th floor, they found a middle-aged man, visibly irritated, arguing with a nervous staff member. "Excuse me," Emma intervened softly. "I'm Emma Morgan, one of the hotel owners. How can I help?" The man turned, surprised to see the owners there in person. "Well, finally, someone who can get things done around here. This room is not up to what was promised. The view is not what I expected, and the air conditioning makes an irritating noise." Richard watched with admiration as Emma handled the situation with calm and empathy. She listened attentively to the guests' complaints, offered immediate solutions, and finally invited him for a personalized tour of the hotel, including a special tasting at the Twice Cafe. By the end of the day, not only was the guest satisfied, but he had also become an enthusiast of the hotel, promising to recommend it to all his contacts. "You were amazing up there," Richard praised Emma when they were finally alone. "The way you transformed a potentially disastrous situation into an opportunity. I'm impressed." Emma smiled, a bit shy. "I learned from the best, didn't I? Besides, I understood that each challenge is a chance to reinforce what Dawn represents: welcome, understanding, and second chances." The weeks passed, and the Dawn Hotel continued to thrive. But not everything was rosy. With success came new challenges and pressures. One night, Richard found Emma on the hotel terrace, looking thoughtful. "Hey, sweetheart, everything okay?" he asked, joining her in contemplation of the illuminated city. Emma sighed. "More or less, Dad, have you ever felt that maybe you've taken on more than you can handle?" Richard looked at her attentively. "Many times. What's worrying you?" "It's that. The hotel is doing so well, and I love every minute of it. But sometimes I wonder if I'm missing other opportunities, to travel, to explore other areas of my career." Richard felt a tightness in his chest. Part of him feared this moment would come, the moment when Emma might want to fly away from the nest they had built together. "Emma," he began, choosing his words carefully, "when I found you, I promised myself that I would never be an obstacle to your dreams. If you feel you need to explore other paths, I fully support that." Emma looked at him, surprised. "Really? But what about the hotel? And us?" Richard smiled, putting his arm around her. "The hotel will be here, I will be here. But you, my dear, you have a whole world to discover. If that's what your heart desires, then you should follow that path." Tears glistened in Emma's eyes. "Thank you, Dad. That means a lot to me. But you know what? I think I've already discovered what really matters. It's right here." They stood there, embraced, watching the city that had become the backdrop to their reconciliation story. The dawn. Hotel glowed below them, a beacon of hope and new beginnings. "You know," Emma said after a moment, "I think I understood something important. Having roots doesn't mean staying put. It means having a place to return to, no matter where life takes us." Richard felt his heart fill with pride and love. "Exactly, sweetheart. And you will always have a place to return to. Always." As the night progressed, father and daughter remained on the terrace, talking about the future, about dreams and possibilities. The Dawn Hotel continued its rhythm below, a silent witness to what love, perseverance, and the courage to give second chances can accomplish. And so, under the starry sky of New York, Richard and Emma reaffirmed their commitment to each other and to the journey they had begun together. No matter what the future held, they would face it hand in hand, strengthened by the bond they had built and by the legacy they were creating. The Dawn Hotel wasn't just a successful venture. It was the symbol of a reunited family, of realized dreams, and the promise of many adventures yet to come. 5 years passed since the inauguration of the Dawn Hotel. What began as a project, born from the reunion between father and daughter, had transformed into one of the most respected and beloved hotel ventures in New York. More than a luxury hotel, Dawn had become a symbol of renewal, second chances, and family bonds. On a sunny Sunday morning, Richard and Emma were sitting on the hotel terrace, as they had done so many times over the years. The view of the city was breathtaking, with Central Park stretching green below them. "It seems like only yesterday that we inaugurated this place," Emma commented, holding a cup of the special blend from the Twice Cafe. Richard smiled, his eyes scanning the horizon. "It's true. And look at us now." The last few years had been transformative for both. Emma, now 29, had flourished not only as a businesswoman, but also as a respected leader in the hotel industry. Her innovative vision and compassionate approach to managing Dawn had inspired many in the field. Richard, in turn, found a new purpose beyond business. He had become a mentor for young entrepreneurs, sharing not only his success experiences, but also the lessons learned from his mistakes and the importance of family connections. "You know, Dad," Emma began, a special gleam in her eyes, "there's something I want to share with you." Richard leaned in, curious. "What is it, sweetheart?" Emma took a deep breath, a smile spreading across her face. "I'm pregnant." The news hit Richard like a wave of pure emotion. Tears formed in his eyes as he hugged his daughter. "Oh, Emma, that's wonderful. I'm going to be a grandfather." They laughed together, the joy of the moment eclipsing everything around them. When they separated from the hug, Richard noticed something different in Emma's look. "There's more, isn't there?" he asked softly. Emma nodded. "Yes, Michael and we decided to name the baby Eleanor, if it's a girl." Richard felt his heart fill with an emotion he could barely contain. Eleanor, the name that had initiated this entire journey, would now be passed on to a new generation. "It's perfect," he managed to say, his voice choked. "Your mother would be so honored." At that moment, as if the universe wanted to participate in the celebration, a ray of sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the plaque with Eleanor's phrase in the cafe below. "Coffee can burn twice, on the tongue and in the heart." "Look," Emma said, pointing. "It's as if she were here giving us her blessing." Richard nodded, moved. "She always has been, in a way, in every step of this journey." Reflecting on the past years, both realized how much they had grown, not just as individuals but as a family. The Dawn Hotel, which was born from a casual encounter and a cup of coffee, had become the catalyst for a profound transformation in their lives. "You know," Richard began, his gaze lost on the horizon, "when I started in this business, years ago I thought I was building an empire, but now I see that the true legacy isn't the hotels or the financial success." Emma looked at him, curious. "What is it then?" "It's this," he replied, gesturing between them. "It's the family we rebuilt, the bonds we strengthened. It's knowing that no matter what happens, we have each other." Emma smiled, tears of happiness glistening in her eyes. And now we'll have someone else to share that legacy with. They remained silent for a moment, absorbing the magnitude of the moment. The Dawn Hotel hummed with activity below them, guests and staff moving in harmony, each carrying their own story. "I think it's time to think about the future," Emma finally said. "Not just the hotels, but our families." Richard nodded, a gleam of excitement in his eyes. "You're right. Maybe it's time to expand Dawn, not just as a hotel, but as a philosophy. Create places where people can reconnect, rediscover lost bonds. Jazz and give second chances," Emma completed. "Exactly like we did." The idea quickly took shape between them. Dawn wouldn't just be a hotel, but the beginning of a network of spaces dedicated to reuniting families, healing old wounds, and creating new memories. As they excitedly discussed plans for the future, Richard couldn't help but marvel at the path life had traced. From a lonely businessman focused only on success, he had become a father, soon to be a grandfather, and part of something much greater than himself. The sun began to set over New York, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. Richard and Emma remained on the terrace, their hearts full of gratitude and hope. "To the future," Emma said, raising her coffee cup in a toast. "To the future," Richard repeated, touching his cup to hers. "And to the second chances that brought us here." As the city lights began to shine, father and daughter stayed there, contemplating the legacy they had built together. The Dawn Hotel glowed below them, a beacon of hope and renewal, promising new chapters and endless possibilities for all who crossed its doors. And so, in the heart of New York, a story that began with a cup of coffee and a phrase from the past continued to unfold, touching lives and reminding everyone that it's never too late for a new beginning.